While most of our attention on this channel has been on the diplomatic issue, especially regard to the Russia-Ukraine war, everything that has been happening with Alaska, with President Trump, and then, of course, into the White House with Zelensky and Trump, and then with President Trump and the European leaders, et cetera. Everything's been talking about since what's been the fallout. We've also talked a lot about what's going on in the battlefields, because we talk about how those are inextricable, and you can't understand one without understanding where things are in the other one. All those things are critically important. We talked about that earlier today on two of our other shows. This one, though, wants to focus on something that's a little bit different, but no less important specifically for the United States. This is one that affects the U.S. probably more than anything else, either in Europe or even with Ukraine, and that is in the tariff war. Now, Trump has, of course, been fighting these tariffs ever since he came in. He always talked about how tariff is his favorite word. And he had that big, infamous Liberation Day of when he would slap tariffs on almost every country in the entire planet. And then how a lot of those have been backed off since then. But some of them are still on. There has been deals worked out with Japan, with European Union, et cetera. A lot of them are kind of dicey. They're whether they're going to actually be implemented, whether they'll see the light of day, whether they'll turn into any fruition. There's lots of contradictory information on the economic front in the United States. Are they costing Americans a lot? Because a lot of data seems to imply that it's really hurting American consumers. And yet many of the architects of all this, to include Trump himself and Howard Lutnick, and some of these others, Bessent, they say, no, this is going to be great. It's going to be a big windfall for the United States, and people are going to get money and all kinds of stuff. We'll see how all that works out. But how all of this impacts on the diplomatic issue of trying to resolve the Russia-Ukraine war centers especially on China, India, and Brazil. Now, you may recall, just as a quick reminder, several weeks back, Trump initially said he put a 50-day notice, an ultimatum on Russia. Said either they agree to an unconditional ceasefire or he would have bone-crushing sanctions come down. You may recall we had Lindsey Graham and one of his Senate colleagues from the Democratic side that went on television right before Trump was going to announce all this. And they said this is going to really put Russia in a bind, and it's going to make people have to decide whether they want to go east or whether they want to go west, et cetera. And then Trump came out and didn't really talk that much about sanctions, but just kind of left it on the table. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 50 days was reduced to 10. And then when that 10 came to close to being announced, actually even before the 10th day, I think it was on the 7th day, Trump kind of out of nowhere singled out India and said, we're going to slap an additional 25% tariff on them, bringing it to a total of 50%. Now, that is still on the books, and many things have happened since that time. In fact, one could argue that, or one may have expected that threat would go off the table, because recall that Trump's claim was that the whole issue with the tariffs was to force Russia to an unconditional ceasefire. Well, when Trump met with Putin in Alaska, and then when he's had all the subsequent meetings since, the unconditional ceasefire is not even on the table anymore yet. As of right now, this tariff is still threatening on India. Now, they had a 25% tariff already, and on the 27th of August, so that's just barely a week away, that's supposed to still go into effect. Now, this has had no shortage of frustration and puzzlement on the part of the Indians, but it's also having potential backfire effects. And we don't have a lot of information from the White House about what's going on with this India thing and what even the purpose of it is. Why would they single out only the one country, India, to say either you stop doing business with Russia, stop buying Russian oil, or we're going to have this big sanction? Because there's lots of other countries that get Russian oil and gas, not to mention significant portions of that going to European states. And yet Trump's not talking about tariffing them. So that's causing confusion inside of India and New Delhi about why are you singling us out and what's the intent? Now, if Trump actually thinks that's going to cause India to turn against Russia and to stop buying Russian oil, there's virtually no chance of that at all. And if anyone thinks that by having these sanctions implemented, that's going to cause Russia a problem, even less reason to think so, because nobody's going to stop buying Russian oil and gas because it comes at a discounted price even than the global price right now, which by itself is also on a bit of a downturn. One of the reasons why in the U.S. that gasoline prices are so low, because the cost of a barrel of gas and oil is also low. But now then we have to think, if Trump doesn't pull this off, what is that going to mean for the United States? Now, we love to say that we're the biggest global economy, that we run the show here, that we have the rules-based international order and all that, and that we can issue instructions to other people. Like we had a deal that was very pernicious and bad for Japan, bad for the European Union, and Trump basically put them in a position to where they had to put a good face on it and claim that it was a really good deal for them, when in reality it was a bad deal for them, because now then it's costing them more to do business than it was before. But if it comes to fruition, it's a good deal for the United States, because both of those have big investments inside the United States, in addition to lower tariffs for us and higher tariffs for the other side. Now, that only can go so far. When you try bullying techniques and compelling others to do things that are against their national interest and are benefiting us, that's just not going to go over well, even if, and it's a big if, all of those terms are going to be enacted. As we've mentioned, I think at the time, and others certainly have, the devil's in the details on this too. And a lot of this is just a big figure, $550 billion for Japan, but no deals are actually done. There's no contract signed. There's no, $550 billion worth of investments that are going to come. It's kind of a promise to. Again, we'll see if it works out. But the bottom line is, we are using coercion and pushing against others to try and force them into doing what we wanted. And it has at least the appearance of success there. Now, when you look at China, of course, they've been in the crosshairs of these tariffs for a long time. They had this big, trade war that went on for a short period of time, where we had 145% tariffs on China. They had 125% on us. Then it got lowered to 30%. And then we're making negotiations. Those are still ongoing. They were supposed to have gone back into effect at a higher rate on the 1st of August, I believe. Now that has been postponed again. So that's still being worked out and hasn't been resolved. So China has not given in to the pressure. And so Trump keeps moving the deadline. We'll see what happens with that too. But let's look now at the Indian situation, because that could be kind of a big canary in the coal mine, but it could be a real issue about where things go next and how will it affect even medium term. Forget about long-term effects for the United States. It could be quite negative. Let's start off, first of all, just a few days ago, where Lindsey Graham was asked one more time why he wants to have all these really strong sanctions on China and India.
He came to Alaska because Trump threatened to put a 50% tariff on India for buying Russian oil and gas. What's the weakness of Russia? Almost all of their income comes from oil and gas sales. If we went after the customers of Russia and said you had to pick between the American economy and buying cheap Russian oil or gas, they would pick the American economy. So here's what I would say about President Trump. He's the only guy that can do this. And my advice to President Trump and Marco is, if you got to convince Putin that if this war doesn't end justly and honorably, with Ukraine making concessions also, we're going to destroy the Russian economy. We have the ability to do it.
Yeah. Do we have the ability to do it? You're going to destroy the Russian economy. I mean, this is beyond absurd. And it's embarrassing. I mean, let's just call it what it is. To sit there and claim that you can destroy the Russian economy with sanctions and not harm us is just, I mean, it's so detached from reality that it's more alarming even than embarrassing, because it's been tried in spades by the previous administration, and all those are still on. Nobody's reduced anything. And yet, obviously, it hasn't brought Russia to their knees at all. In fact, they're continuing to expand, and their economy is doing relatively well when compared to the European economy, which is not doing relatively well. It is much more anemic even than the Russian one. And even though their growth has dropped off considerably since last year, they're having more issues with inflation, et cetera, and they're taking some actions internally to do that. That has lowered the projections for what they're going to grow, but they're still inching along in their growth territory. But there is nothing even close to saying that the Ukrainian or the Russian economy is going to have any kind of collapse. And course, speaking of Ukraine, you can look at them. Their economy has been destroyed and just gashed, and it's only being propped up by substantial siphoning of funds from a lot of European countries, and I think still some from the United States. The only way they kept afloat is by this massive infusion, and yet you see that they still find a way to muddle through. They still find a way to keep the war going and all that kind of stuff. So Russia, which is orders of magnitude bigger and stronger than the Ukraine side, and they have a few warning signs and some difficulties here and there, like we do, like the Europeans do. We're not going to collapse, at least no time soon. And the Europeans don't appear to have been collapsed, even though they've been struggling through with even less growth than the Russians have up to this point. And now then you want to come in with some kind of new sanctions, you think. And so now then the idea is, aha, tells you what, we'll go after India, China, and Brazil, obviously 3 of the founding members of BRICS. And we want to put pressure on them. And so we, as Lindsey Graham said in that quote right there, we want to put especially India in a position where they have to choose. Are you going to go with Russia and BRICS, or are you going to go with the American economy and the American, because you're going to have to choose. You got to go one way or the other. So you're putting India in a position to where it has to choose where it's going to go and what it's going to do. That is a bad move, because Lindsey Graham is still operating on the assumption, and apparently many in the United States and in the administration are, that this is 1990, that this is like 1992, the early 1990s, when the Soviet Union collapsed and fell apart and dissolved, and the resulting Russian state and the other independent countries were anemic and just moribund and just on their knees economically, etc. And China was had a peasant army, and it had its GDP was quite low in comparison to where it is now. As a means of comparison, the Chinese economy, as I believe I saw earlier today, in the year 2000, I think it was $1.4 trillion worth of business and economy, and it's $14 trillion. So they have substantially increased their economic power and prowess in the region and globally, of course, with the Belt and Road Initiative and all kinds of other bilateral deals that they have going on all over the planet economically. So now then, of course, you have the BRICS that's been started, and it's been going on for quite a bit of time now, I think a couple of decades. But because of some of these actions, they're now starting to pick up some steam, and they're growing. I believe that they started with the 5 countries, and now then they're up to officially 11 with earlier this year. There's another, I believe it's 11 partner countries, but a total of 40 other countries are either going to be partners or they are in the process of seeking to get into the BRICS organization itself. Already, the countries of BRICS, especially because of China and India by themselves, with 1.3, 1.4 billion people each, represents a massive portion of the global GDP, now more than the G7 countries. So already they are really starting to make some heft, and now that you see they're getting bigger. When we take actions like these, it gives these countries, other countries, not just these, more incentive to find markets besides the American ones, so that they don't find themselves in the crosshairs in the future to where they try to get bullied to have some kind of a deal that's good for Washington and bad for them, or face the prospect of having to find another outlet. Well, this is obviously, as you might guess, not playing well in New Delhi, and their foreign minister earlier today voiced a little bit of his frustration.
Not the biggest purchasers of Russian oil, that is China. We are not the biggest purchasers of Russian LNG. I'm not sure, but I think that is the European Union. We are not the country which has the biggest trade surge with Russia after 2022. I think there are some countries to the south. We are a country where actually the Americans said for the last few years that we should do everything to stabilize the world energy markets, including buying oil from Russia. Incidentally, we also buy oil from America, and that amount has been increasing. So, quite honestly, we are very perplexed at the logic of the argument that you had referred to.
So one has to ask the question, why do you want to put India in a position of us or them? I mean, that harkens back to George Bush's, you're either with us, you're against us, the cowboy kind of mentality when he was heading into the Iraq war in 2003. And that was a situation where we had the power then. We could give ultimatums like that. It was always a bad idea. It was never good because that was to our friends as well as to our potential adversaries, and who could do anything against it. France and Germany especially were really against us going into the Iraq and fighting another war in 2003. And they were very, very vocal about their opposition to it, but ultimately they fell in line because they didn't have any choice. There's just nothing they could have done. They didn't have the economic or political or military levers to go their own path at that time. At least that's what they believed. Whether they could or not, it maybe is a separate issue. But that was the case that they did. And any of our potential allies or adversaries, they didn't have the choice. They didn't have the power. They couldn't do anything. And so, of course, he went in there. Well, it's not 2003 anymore. And now there are opportunities and there are other options that people can take. And India itself is a developing and evolving economy of its own. It is starting to have some weight of its own that it's putting around the globe. But we get a lot of things from India. And you heard some of his frustration there. The foreign minister was because, listen, I mean, the United States was saying, hey, we want you guys to help balance out and stabilize the energy market for our benefit, because it helps us if the energy prices are stable. And then he says, now all of a sudden you're turning against us and telling us we've got to choose. Well, what if they do have to choose? And what if they choose not to go with us? Like I said, we get a lot of things like rare earths and several other kind of electronics and other benefits and manufacturing, et cetera, other commerce that we get from India that is very important to the United States economy. And the assumption is, of the Lindsey Grahams of the world, that, well, they'll just choose us so we can make all kinds of threats and they're eventually going to give in. But what if they don't? And you see, Russia is quick to pick up on this because Sergei Lavrov, in a recent comment, said that, look, we're actually expanding our cooperation with India.
In general, the economic base of our especially privileged strategic partnership is strengthening steadily and progressively. And this once again emphasizes the special nature of our relations. We are convinced that the development of these relations, this strategic partnership, meets the fundamental interests of our peoples and promotes international regional security and stability, which is very, very important in the current difficult conditions on the world stage. And today we discuss the upcoming events within the framework of this dialogue, including preparations for the visit of the President of the Russian Federation to India before the end of this year. There are plans to prepare a solid package of documents for this summit. Well, and, of course, in good tradition, we welcome good traditions in the sphere of military cooperation, holding joint exercises, and in the sphere of military technical cooperation, which also rests on very, very serious historical foundations.
So you see, Russia is not just looking at, hey, let's go down the path of economic cooperation. They're already in BRICS together, but they're saying, let's expand that. Let's add some diplomatic issues onto it as well. Let's get into the political sphere. Let's start working more cooperatively together, and the economic sphere. But they're also saying, even in the military sphere, let's get closer and closer together. Now, who do you suppose that might be at the summit? Because like so many things in international relations, it's a zero-sum deal. If you're moving towards Russia and getting closer with them militarily, then that means you're getting distance from the United States. And of course, we do a lot of business with India. There's a lot of military cooperation that's going on there. Do we really want to put that at risk? I mean, listen, the reason why China and Russia are so close together today is because of everything starting off with the Biden administration, they continue to support Ukraine no matter what, and trying to condemn everybody else in the world who didn't support us and our side, didn't go against the Russian side, et cetera. And the issues with Russia and North Korea, Russia and Iran, and then Russia and China. We have pushed all of them together because we've made them our enemy. We've said, you guys are the adversary. China, you're our pacing threat. We're actively working in a proxy war against Russia and have been for years now. All of that pushes them closer together. So it's one thing if it's China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. That's been the case for a long time. Now then, let's just push them close together. Now, you want to add India into that? Because listen, India and China has their own issues there, and they have all kinds of challenges, and some relatively recent ones. But you're giving them motivation to put that aside, to work that out, and to increase their cooperation. So first with India and Russia, and additionally with India and China. And speaking of China, let's take a look at that one in there too, because we're doing the same thing to China, trying to put them in this no-win situation. But the Chinese are saying, yeah, we're not having this. This is published earlier today by the Global Times, which is the official English language of the Chinese Communist government. So this is their government mouthpiece. But they're saying here, listen, no tariff war can change global popularity of Chinese products. Stability of China's market is their foreign minister on robust trade data. When you look down at the details of this, and this is corroborated in other information, it's one thing to have propaganda, but when the truth is something that supports your propaganda, you can just tell the truth. And it says Chinese foreign minister spokesman Mao Ning said on Thursday that China's foreign trade has maintained steady motivation or momentum despite a, quote, complex and changing external environment, which means our trade and tariff issues, which shows both the strong fundamentals of China's economy and the robust global demand for Chinese products. This is the result of China's efforts to expand high-level opening up, advanced high-quality development, and promote industrial upgrading, Mao said, noting that facts have proven that engaging in international trade based on comparative advantage and pursuing shared development brings benefits to all parties. And I think I've mentioned to you that I spoke with a diplomat that's friendly to the United States just within the last few weeks, and that there is a lot of frustration out there in the friendly diplomatic area at how we're taking, using all these tariffs and stuff against people, and specifically on China. This source told me that Chinese have been reaching out to both the Japanese and the South Koreans and saying, look, man, y'all really want to get tied in closer with the United States? Because we've got some good alternatives. We're looking for win-win kind of stuff. We're not going to compel anything, but if you want to get into a situation that's to your disadvantage and to your cost, instead of one that you get benefit from, I guess you can do what you want. But those in the past, when China has tried to say that, according to this diplomatic source, it just kind of got a rolling of the eyes. And they said, yeah, we remember a lot of the stuff where China did some stuff to us in the past, which was far from friendly and win-win. And that kind of held a lot of sway. But now then, the biggest alarm to me was they're listening. And for the first time, at least in my adult lifetime, Japan and China and South Korea are listening to China. They're considering what they're saying. And anytime you start listening, and then if the actions don't change from the U.S. side, and I think they're still trying to work out a deal on the South Korean side here, you could move to listening, to active listening, to action. And again, like so many things, it's a zero-sum deal. We could inadvertently be driving not even just adversaries together, but even some of our allies. We could be driving them up in this other direction. And in fact, this other issue, I mentioned BRICS at the outset here, but the tariff war is the reason for straightforward for external threats. Sorry, that's backed up, coming down here. Yeah, it says Trump's tariff war is forging an unlikely BRICS unity. So I mentioned BRICS has been around for a long time, but they hadn't really gone that far, and they hadn't expanded until recently. Not a coincidence here. And when you see Trump's latest wave of tariffs may look aggressive on the surface, but for the BRICS grouping, long regarded as a loosely structured bloc, it may not necessarily be bad news. By wielding tariffs as a weapon against India, Brazil, and South Africa, 3 founding members, Trump has in effect pushed them towards closer alignment with China and Russia, both of which have long faced U.S. strategic pressures. So you see that these movements continue on, and it's being recognized in both the official Chinese communist outlets, the friendly outlets, friendly diplomatic sources that we have. We're going in a wrong direction. And look, this is not going to accomplish what we want. This is not going to cause India to turn against Russia. And if India did turn against Russia, that wouldn't cause Russia to collapse. It would be more difficult for them. It would be harder. But that's probably not going to happen either, because India almost certainly is not going to turn against them. China is not going to turn. Brazil was furious when they were threatened with these sanctions, had Trump's original 50-day deadline expired, and then he put all these secondary tariffs on all the countries that did business with Russia. Although oddly, and that was pointed out by the Indian foreign minister, nobody was talking about sanctioning European customers of the Russian oil and gas. So that was, a double standard on different levels of friendship that we have. So that didn't go without notice either. All of these things work against American interests. We are living and we're acting like it's a free-for-all, like it's 2003, and screw my allies, screw our adversaries. Y'all just do whatever we tell you to do. We're going to do whatever we want to do, and you can't do anything against it. You have that mentality, which was relatively true in 2003, not anymore. It's not true anymore. And the more we push, the more people, the elasticity where they might come back, it gets less and less elastic, and more to the point to where that thing could break. And you don't want to get in a situation to where you cause people and force them into a situation where they have to make a choice, and they do choose against you. That's something that we need to pay a lot more attention to. It is way beyond time that the United States needs to take a bit of a pill for hubris. We need to get rid of some of this stuff. We need to get into a little bit more of a situation to where we are taking an appetite suppressant on arrogance. It's way beyond time, but I don't see any evidence that we're going to do it so far. And what worries me is that we're going to get out over our skis here. We're not going to get the ceasefire we want. We're not going to get an outcome in the Russia-Ukraine war that we want. Russia's going to keep fighting. We're going to keep maybe going back again to this sanctions deal, push more of our friends into the baskets of our enemies or our adversaries, pacing threats like in China, whatever, making them look better, making them look more attractive. And so this 40 countries around the world that are considering joining the BRICS may go more. And some of those, by the way, like Turkey, are in the European, well, not the European Union, but they're in NATO and they're in the Western sphere. You see more and more of those go in that direction. Others are going to end up following, especially if they see that staying in the orbit of the United States puts them in a disadvantage economically and of their own free will about what they want to do with their foreign policies, et cetera. There's a deadline on this, folks. There's an expiration date, better way to put it. This is not 2003, and the longer we keep going thinking it is, we're going to wake up one day and find ourselves in a bad situation, irreparable. Because once people make that jump to a new orbit, they're not just going to jump back because you change your mind, because they've been burned too many times. So we better wake up and figure out that we're taking ourselves into a world of hurt here, and the president of the United States is setting himself up for a whole series of failures that he can't talk his way out of, and he can't just tariff his way out of. Those things are just not working that much anymore. Those are things that we need to pay attention to. It's not too late. We haven't gone down that path yet. Trump has promised all kinds of tariffs and ends up backing off of them. I'd like to see him back off of this one too, and then change policies and to get back into a place to where it's like, hey, I want to have a situation and a system that you want to join, because it is looking out for your interest as well. And by doing business with us, it's safe, it's secure, which used to be the case, that you can benefit from the stability that we can provide. That's still possible. We haven't gone too far down the road, but we need to make a sharp U-turn. That's not even a 45-degree angle off. We need a U-turn because we're getting closer and closer to a precipice. We'll see if we do. We will stay on top of it for you right here at the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Appreciate you guys being with us late on an afternoon like this, and we'll look forward to seeing you Friday on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. See you then.